Dear colleagues, good morning. I'm Mirna Domit, the President of the Order of Nurses in Lebanon. I would like to thank you for listening to this call. On August 4th at 6:07 p.m., Lebanon, and more specifically its capital Beirut, lived a massive explosion whereby 4 hospitals were completely demolished. 6 nurses were killed on the spot while on duty. More than 200 nurses of our colleagues were wounded. Many of them lost their homes and lost their cars. Therefore, we are calling on your generosity to seek your help to support the Lebanese nurses. Thank you.
And I just wanted very briefly to run through really a little bit of background as to why we're here and what we're going to be talking about. So for those of you who don't know, and there are people who are new to this whole subject who have joined today, which is absolutely fantastic. The Lebanese government has resigned, and this is amidst growing public anger following the devastation that has taken place in Beirut on the 4th of August with the explosion that has happened. And as you've seen in the video, at least 200 people have been killed, roughly 5,000 people have been injured. And this period of time is described in the headlines as Lebanon being in the throes of its worst crisis for many years. And it's not just because of the coronavirus pandemic. That has triggered a lot of poverty, but prior to all of this, there has been a kind of build-up to this economic crisis. For example, in 2019, there was a proposal that WhatsApp calls should be taxed, and that provoked great public outcry. Before the pandemic, unemployment stood at 25%, and nearly a third of the population was living below the poverty line. And in the last 10 months, the Lebanese pound has devalued by roughly 80%, so things are not looking too great. There's talk of daily power cuts, a lack of safe drinking water, limited public health care, and one of the world's worst internet connections. So bravo to those people who are here today from Beirut and online. So fantastic that you're here with us, and I hope it stays stable. Lastly, a final statistic is that Lebanon is ranked 137th out of 180 countries, 180 being the worst, and that is on the Transparency International's 2019 Corruption Perceptions Index. Now, having said all of that, the picture is not all doom and gloom. I had the privilege of visiting Lebanon a few years ago with my young family, and we had an incredible welcome, tasted some of the most wonderful food in the world, and viewed some incredible landscapes. And so, albeit we're talking today about how Europe can support Lebanon going forward, I hope that we will also be looking at positive outcomes and, really focusing on some of the wonderful things about Lebanon that we want to nurture and support. So having said all of that, I'd like to hand over to our first speaker, and that is Kristof Kleemann. The floor is yours, Kristof.
Yeah, thank you very much, Isabel. Thank you for having me here tonight. As old Mehillian, I feel, of course, very much attached to the National Liberal Club, and I'm very much honored to be addressing you here tonight in the name of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom. I've been here for not even, now 8 months, so I'm also very fresh to Lebanon, but I'm trying to understand the country every day, and it's not easy. I was asked to kind of introduce the political situation here in Lebanon after the blast of August 4th. And I will also try to answer maybe why the UK, the EU, and the West in general, I think, should have an interest in this tiny country. I say tiny not out of disrespect, but just to give you a perspective, because the entire country doesn't even have the size of the county of Yorkshire. And in this kind of tiny piece of land, you have 18 different confessions. I think it is home to one of the most complex political systems. And since the beginning of the war in Syria, the Lebanon is hosting more than 1.5 million Syrian refugees, while having a population of only 5.5 million. So if you would put that in the relation to the UK, it would mean that, you know, the UK would be hosting 22 million refugees. You know, that's almost unimaginable. But let me maybe start also with the blast at the Beirut port. We just saw the pictures. It was really horrific. I mean, 200 people died, over 300,000 homes that were destroyed. And the destruction of Beirut really can be seen in the whole city, including some of the poorest neighborhoods, but also those neighborhoods that were so important for the vibrant life of the city and that were also hosting or home to many of the historic houses. The World Bank now has estimated that the cost of the reconstruction of the most kind of destroyed neighborhoods in Beirut would amount to at least 18 billion US dollars. And I also personally was at my apartment, which is only around 800 meters. I don't know now the conversion rate into feet, but 800 meters away when the blast was happening. And I must say that the impact was immense. I mean, all my windows were blown out. Everything was flying through the apartment. And I even had afterwards doors in my apartments that did not belong to my apartment. So they must have been flowing in from elsewhere. But luckily also my team and we were all unhurt. And I think all this happened, and this is what, you know, all this happened, and this is really important to remember, against the backdrop of, I think, the worst financial and economic crisis this country has seen. This economic and financial crisis was looming for some time and really hit Lebanon last year. And Benedikt will, of course, talk about the economic situation in more detail, but I just want to give you a couple of numbers. Isabel already touched on that, just to illustrate how severe the situation was already before the blast. Isabel said 80%, the currency has devaluated by 80% since the beginning of the year. Most bank accounts of Lebanese have been blocked, and they can only be withdrawing very, very kind of small numbers of money each day. 50% of the population now live below the poverty line. And without foreign help, it is estimated that the country will run out of foreign reserves by the end of this year. And that also means that they will not be able to be paying, you know, for essential imports such as oil, such as fuel, such as medication or foodstuffs. And if this was not enough already for the country, you know, it's also going through a tremendous political turmoil. Isabel said that since, you know, last October, we have seen widespread protests in Lebanon against the political elite in the country, and many Lebanese really have lost their trust in the system that was created after the 15-year civil war, a system that was created with the Taif Agreement in 1990. And the idea back then was to create a system in order to balance the different religious sects that exists in Lebanon, and that not one sect can dominate another. And I think while the system has kind of, you know, at least ensured a feeling of relative stability in the last 30 years, it also created a system where reforms are almost impossible to conduct. And this is because any kind of reform or major reform needs the consent of all political players in this country. So in the end, nothing is really touched. Also, the agreement of 1990 basically left the warlords in power, and they have run parties like family businesses, leading to wide-scale corruption and political mismanagement. And of course, one should also not forget that Lebanon is also home to the terror organization of Hezbollah, and that organization is basically a state in a state and running basically public services for its own sect. And the outcome of this failure can be seen in everyday life in Lebanon. Just to give you some examples, Isabel already touched on that. Electricity. The electricity sector in Lebanon is running a $2 billion deficit a year. But at the same time, even in Beirut, you don't get reliable electricity for more than 2 hours a day. There's no sewage system, so the whole Bay Area of Beirut is completely polluted. There's no public transport. there are no public spaces, and the list goes on and on. And also, of course, the Beirut Blast is a result of this kind of state failure. And I think given all this, it's not surprised that the people of Lebanon feel that the current political class does not really represent them anymore. Now, of course, the question is, where do we go from here? I think that President Macron has invested a lot of political capital in the country in the last month. He has been here already twice. It's not a surprise, of course, as France, has very strong ties to this country. But I think he hit really the right tone when he was when he was visiting here in Lebanon, and he made very clear, that the support that goes now beyond the immediate aid after the blast will be conditional to fundamental change. And he also increased very much the pressure on the political class by using the stick of individual sanctions against Lebanese politicians. Something I think that they are very afraid of, because a lot of them have their fortunes outside of Lebanon. And of course, if their financial fortunes are frozen or elsewhere, this will really impact them. And you have seen some kind of, that this French pressure has to some extent worked. There was a move towards now a new prime minister that is designated to form a cabinet. The French wanted to have this cabinet within 2 weeks. These 2 weeks have now already passed, and to be honest, it's not looking so well. The latest news is that he will try one last attempt to form this cabinet, otherwise he will resign, and there are also a lot of news reports out at the moment that he could be resigning by tomorrow because he's unable to form a government. And this is mainly due to two Shia parties, Amal and Hezbollah, who wanted to have still the finance ministry at their hands. I will not go in more detail, maybe we can discuss this in the Q&A. But this inability of the designated prime minister to form a government is certainly alarming news and something that we should be aware of.
Kristof,
yeah.
Thank you so much for the summary that you've given us. I can already think of a million questions. So I'm going to pause you there because we want to make full use of you when it comes to the Q&A, and move on to Benedikt Barthelmess, please. Benedikt, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you to you, Kristof, for that superb introduction to the topic. I'll start out with a few remarks on the origins of the economic and financial crisis in Lebanon, which should add some color to what you two just said. I should first of all note that the Lebanese economy has had its fair share of economic crisis over the recent decades. However, this crisis is quite different because it really strikes the Lebanese economy at the very heart of its post-Civil War economic model, which was built around the financial sector attracting foreign deposits to fund a growing mountain of debt. So this economic model start to run out of steam when, due to the low oil prices dating back to 2014, the flow of remittances declined from the country's diaspora in oil-producing countries. The central bank tried to counteract this decline in incoming deposits with its so-called financial engineering. None of this turned out to be sustainable, and at the end of the day, all of that effectively amounted to a huge Ponzi scheme that ultimately collapsed in 2019, as Kristof already mentioned, when the country faced a large outflow of funds in the face of civil unrest going across the country. Now, this silent bank run made capital controls inevitable. Then forwarding to February 2020, that is this year, the Lebanese government found itself in a position where it was effectively running out of liquidity in US dollars, and was hence forced to announce a moratorium on its external debt. That resulted in intense negotiations between the different stakeholders, including the IMF. And in April, the government presented a quite ambitious recovery plan, which did have the merit of clearly setting out the need for reform and adjustment. However, the implementation of this was instantly held back due to the difficulty of agreeing on reforms and other prior action required by the IMF. There was also quite a lot of resistance within the political establishments, and one should also add that critics quite rightly pointed out that the recovery plan set highly unrealistic goals for the government's fiscal policy, including a large primary surplus of around 3.8%. Another major problem has been ever since that there's absolutely no consensus on the size of the losses across the country's banking sector, which of course continue to grow. And some estimates are as for the losses are as high as 100 billion. The government and central bank believe that it's much lower, but we shall find out more once the first ever external audit of the central bank will be completed, which is still ongoing. Now, how can the country get out of this this crisis? There's absolutely no doubt that at this stage, the only way to achieve sustainable economic recovery requires a restructuring of public sector debt, and of course also extensive banking sector reform. This is, in my view, very likely going to result in the merger of a number of banks, and in very painful haircuts for depositors that could very well exceed 50% of individuals' deposits. So for every dollar that you deposit, you're very likely going to get less than 50 cents back. There's also absolutely no doubt that this reform will have to be accompanied by extensive support in the tens of billions from foreign countries, and at this stage, it is an absolute mystery to me how and where this money is going to come from. So if you look at at Lebanon's quota at the IMF, the fund would normally not be willing to lend the country more than 4 to 5 billion, which is nothing compared to the figures I've just mentioned earlier, right? The IMF does have a framework to allow for roughly for a doubling of that credit line, but that would require a quite strong level of international political support, which seems to be very hard to come by at the moment, especially the United States, who are an absolute essential player in all of this, are very hostile to elements in the Lebanese political landscape, notably Hezbollah. So in addition to the IMF's involvement, along with, of course, their technical expertise, the EU's involvement via multiple channels will be crucial here. And one such channel could be the EU's facility designed to assist countries in its neighborhood as they undertake an IMF program. These programs are called macro financial assistance programs, and have already been used in Lebanon in the past, and more recently in the Ukraine and Jordan. So that could be useful. There could certainly also be a role for the ECB, which would of course be new territory for it, but the ECB, like the European Central Bank, could consider extending temporary swap lines to the Lebanese Central Bank, which should help the which should help restore the confidence in the country and its restructured banking system. But even though the European Central Bank has never taken this step in the context of a financial assistance package, such a temporary swap would also goes to some length in furthering the EU's objective of internationalizing the euro. But again, all of this is going to have to be conditional on extensive reforms, and in the meantime, I would say the EU should really focus on other forms of assistance. So most importantly, the EU and its partners need to develop a framework mapping out civil society organization and find an intelligent way to distribute funds in the presence of extensive payment restrictions affecting the Lebanese banking system. Of course, that always needs to be accompanied by a process of greater accountability and transparency that has been completely missing to date. And we of course also need to distinguish here between short-term emergency assistance following the blast in Beirut and much more long-term assistance to the civil society, but also to the country's private sector. I think I'm running out of time here, so I'm just going to stop here and pass the microphone on to Alistair. Thank you.
Yes, what you said about tightening up the regulatory regime was something that I was going to ask you about, but let's move that on to the Q&A as you've suggested, and we'll move on to Alistair. Great to hear your political view, Alistair.
Okay, thank you, Isabel. And just by way of introduction, let me say, as I hope quite a lot of you will know, I was until recently the party spokesperson on foreign affairs, at which point recently I was brought back to home affairs, but I do have a long-standing interest in relation to the Middle East. I'm an officer of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Palestine, and I'm also interested in the politics of the Gulf. And I was very struck, Isabel, when I was listening to you introducing our discussion here this evening, by the way you described your experience in visiting Lebanon. It sort of reminded me of my own experience of visiting different parts of the Middle East and the Gulf, and in particular, I think in 2007, not long after Hamas had control, I went into Gaza as one of part of a delegation that was the first parliamentarians to go into Gaza. And it's just that constant disjunction between what you find on the ground, the beauty of the country, the enormous resilience of the people, and the sort of determination of them to make the best out of a really dreadful situation. And you find this replicated time and again across the Middle East and the Gulf, and at the same time it's both heartbreaking and inspiring. As it strikes me, and I put my hands up here following the first two speakers, I am no expert in Lebanon, notwithstanding my interest in the region. I am also a member of the Council for Advancement of Arab-British Understandings board, so I'm one of those people who knows a lot, but a lot about very little when it comes to Lebanon. But it strikes me that we've got here two elements which are quite widely found in the Middle East, and which strike at the root of the problem here, but actually are also then the roots of what may be some sort of route map out of this. First of all, you have this massive disjunction between government and government, and that's something which I think, given the events of the 4th of August, has now produced this tremendous anger, which can of course take countries in any number of different ways, and the hope and the aspiration has got to be surely that we are able to channel that anger into reform, both political and economic. And also, again, as you've seen in recent decades in Lebanon, I find in other parts of the Middle East, it really is a proxy for other conflicts. And, you know, Kristof spoke about the role of the French and President Macron in particular, who have given tremendous political lead in the country. Inevitably, I guess, as a consequence of their colonial past there, but doing what is absolutely right and necessary for the here and now. But that is you know, there is a limited opportunity for those of us outside the country and outside the region, and further you get away, the more your role has got to be in terms of actual support rather than direct intervention. Now, I wouldn't be able to pass a Lib Dem audience or a Liberal audience without observing in parenthesis that there's yet another instance where if we were still sitting at the same table as France and Brussels, we would be able to have a much more direct influence and involvement in the work that Macron is doing there. But look, that's a ship which I fear has now sailed. I think the key to what Macron is doing, and I think he's right to do it, but we will have to see just where events take us, is insisting on seeing the political reform before the money starts to flow in behind it. And it's an element of playing chicken. You know, it's a big and high risk game that he is playing, but it's difficult to see what other approach you could take. There will come, though, a tipping point as we come into winter, as you face the growing problems of COVID, as you've seen in recent days and weeks, the setting up of fires in the port area and the huge impact that has on the community there, the post-traumatic stress and the rest of it. Just how much political reform Macron is able to lever out of the political establishment there in return for the money that we will inevitably be putting in. And of course, the other challenge, I think, is for the other countries in the region, in particular the Gulf countries, to step up to the plate.
Alistair,
yeah.
one of the comments actually has been on exactly that point. So can we explore that? I'm going to ask Derek Macaulay to ask his question at 1840 roughly. So can we come back to that point? Because I'd like to go into it in a bit more detail, if that's okay.
Right, we will come back to that point then. In which case, Isabel, I mean, that was me basically then come back full circle in terms of what I was saying about political positioning. Yes, there is an opportunity. Clearly, France takes the lead from the European perspective. Whatever we can do to support that lead, I think, is necessary. But the most direct intervention has to come from those countries that are closest to the situation in Lebanon themselves.
I think you have some agreement there. I see lots of nods. So can I encourage everybody, please, to put your questions in the chat, because I can see the reaction to what our speakers are saying. And, you know, I wish we had 2 hours to listen to everybody. So I'm sure you're just getting a flavour and wish it could last longer, but maybe another time. So I'll pass on now to Robert Woodthorpe Brown. Robert, what are your thoughts?
Right, I think I'm unmuted. So this may sound callous, but God helps those who help themselves. And that doesn't mean those who help themselves to what is destined for others. And the Lebanese confessional divisions, which reserve certain positions for people of different religions, religious faiths, have resulted in civil war and outside intervention by Syria, and are only imitated elsewhere in Northern Ireland. Because certain jobs are guaranteed, it is unsurprising that corruption on a massive scale has resulted. Great wealth sits alongside extreme deprivation. Sumptuous feasts, which I've enjoyed for the last 50 years, alongside starvation. The refugee crisis arising from the Syrian conflict, added to the continuing confinement to many Palestinian camps, has overwhelmed an underperforming economy, and this is made worse by the COVID-19 pandemic and now the explosion in Beirut port, clearly a result of governance failure. Naturally, the civilized world wants to help the poor people living in the country, be they indigenous or refugees. As others have said, President Macron, as leader of the former colonial power which created the country out of Greater Syria, has made it clear that massive aid is needed, but must be conditional on serious political reform. And how to square this with US sanctions on the Shia group Hezbollah, allies of President Assad, and America's bugbear Iran. Now to the economy and the EU. Any figures quoted refer to the EU 27 and discount the departed UK. Lebanon signed an association agreement with the EU in June 2002, and this took 4 years to come into force. Lebanese industrial as well as most agricultural products benefit from free access to the EU market. Lebanon is in negotiation to accede to the WTO, although these negotiations have failed to complete because of hostility by local vested interests. The trade figures are not in Lebanon's favour. 2017 saw imports from Lebanon of 0.4 billion euros against goods the other way of 7.2 billion. The EU accounted for 36.4% of Lebanese total trade. However, given that Lebanon, like the UK, is primarily a service economy, 68% of GDP, in 2017, the EU imported 0.9 billion of services from Lebanon and exported 1.4 billion. Lebanon's whole economy runs a substantial trade deficit, largely offset by foreign income earnings, including capital inflows, remittances from the Lebanese diaspora, as well as the tourist, banking and insurance sectors. Lebanon also benefits from its inclusion in Euromed, one of the key initiatives of the European Neighbourhood Policy. Under the single support framework, the EU bilateral assistance for the period 2017 to 2020 totaled over 200 million euros. And in addition, 50 million euros of investment grants have leveraged 10 times that amount of inward investment. Turning to the refugee crisis, the EU has allocated 2.3 billion euros in assistance since 2011. There are a large number of other initiatives, many of them designed to counter corruption and improve governance. This is obviously a long haul. I'm sure that, led by France, the EU will continue to engage, providing hardship relief to Lebanese people and their huge Syrian and Palestine refugee populations, for the latter compensating with others for the US withdrawal from financing UNRWA. But as President Macron has said, the country cannot continue to be poorly governed and still draw in the substantial aid and investment that it needs to survive as an independent entity. Ends.
Wow. Well, thank you, Robert. I wish we could have seen you for that, though. I don't know if it was deliberate, but we can't see on the video. We heard you loud and clear. That was a power-packed presentation, so thank you so much. I'm going to hand on now to Dr. Mirna Domit. I just want to say that we have got a few questions in the chat, and we won't have a lot of time to ask all of them, but please do keep your questions coming in case I can move them around, etc. So brilliant. Doctor, please go ahead and present to us.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for hosting me tonight. Of course, I'm the president of the Order of Nurses, and I will be talking about the experience of nurses. But before, let me give a few remarks about the presentations. I would like to thank the presenters for giving a full picture of the Lebanese situation. But I would like to highlight that Lebanon is not a poor country, but Lebanon is a stolen country. So this is extremely important. And reform is what we're asking for. And why we always turn towards France? Because we were under the French mandate for so many years. And many Lebanese have the French nationality. And we have many schools that are missionary, French missionary. So the relationship between Lebanon and France is a very special relation. I'm not saying this just to negate the special relationship between Lebanon and other European countries or American countries. But for the French, we have a special affiliation because of the years that we were under the French mandate. Of course, Lebanon, the situation, the economic situation of Lebanon is not the outcome of the past 2 years. No. The economic situation of Lebanon is the outcome of a political map that was put since 1990. And we all know that we were heading towards what we reach now. And as more specifically, since 3 years, all economists were talking about the dangerous situation, economic situation that Lebanon was living, but the plan was to drive us to what we reach now. We all know this. I was born during the war, and every 2 years we had a big war, and during the year we had small wars. It's true that we have many religions, many sects, but they all agreed not to agree. And regarding the current situation with the nomination of a new president of the cabinet, I'm sure all politicians were not happy with the nomination. So under the table, they agreed not to agree. This is why he was not able to have his cabinet. Someone mentioned the Hezbollah. It's true that it's by some people, by some countries, it's being labeled as a terrorist. They have weapons, but it's very important to mention, as President Macron said, Hezbollah is not only a party. Hezbollah is composed of 1/3 of the Lebanese population. So all Shiite in Lebanon, when time comes, they are Hezbollah. And this is very an important information to remember, as President Macron mentioned this, and he really understood the reality. This does not mean that, or I'm not justifying or negating what they are doing, but just I'm describing the situation. Our really financial degradation started in October 2019, when it was the beginning of the revolution, and then it was followed by the beginning of the economic crash. Then we had the COVID, and then we have the economic crash, and then with all its repercussion, and then we have this blast of August 4. Of course, nursing as a profession, like all professions in Lebanon, have been heavily affected by this. So now we have many nurses who are leaving the country, many nurses who have academic degrees, they are leaving the country, and they are immigrating to Europe, to Canada, to USA, to Europe, mainly to France, to Belgium, and even to UAE. So why? Because the Lebanese are known for the good educational system. We speak at least 3 languages. And as nurses, they prove to be resilient. They prove to have a very good knowledge background. And this is why all countries need them. Needless to say that from now until 2030, the whole world would need 9 million nurses. This is why recruitment started heavily. And of course, our nurses, whom their salary now is not even worth $150, and because of the COVID, many hospitals were laying off nurses, or nurses were getting half salaries or no salaries at all. They are seeking to leave. And who is leaving? The ones who have university degrees, the ones with high academic, the ones with high experience. So our healthcare system is in danger, because not only nurses are leaving, our physicians, Lebanese physicians. And here I would like to highlight that Lebanon was known to be the hospital of the Middle East and the Switzerland of the region. So we were known for our educational system, hospital system, healthcare system, and now we are hit by our educational system, by our healthcare system. So again and again, we all feel that this is a plan to drive us where we don't know. But I don't want to speak religion here, but if we look around, the Christians in Iraq were deported, the Christian in Syria were deported, the Christian in all Arab countries have no say. Only the Christian of Lebanon are more or less decreasing in number, but they have a say in the government, they have a say in decision making, and they are still a strong group in the country. So I don't know what is the plan, the international plan, because every politician, every party in Lebanon is related to a foreign country, from east to west. And it's sad to say that none of them is working for the benefit of the country itself. So it's a long story. I'm trying to be very brief. It's not easy to expose this whole situation that started in 1975, but I'm a girl that was born during the war, grew up, went to school, universities, got married, had children, made a career, all this in a country that every year, every 2 years, we have a war, and we're always threatened by the outside. And needless to say that all countries, all foreign militaries that entered Lebanon, they were sponsored by a strong country. So if I want to talk about Syria, Syria was given a green light to enter Lebanon. If I want to talk about the beginning of the war, the Palestinians also, they were given green light. So it's an amalgamation of internal, external powers that are fighting in our country.
Thank you, Dr. Domit. I have to say that I'm sure every single nurse and medical professional in Lebanon must be so proud to have you representing them as a leader. How amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So the first question is directed to Robert. So Robert, thank you for turning your camera back on. It's great to see you in your full glory. Janet, would you like to go ahead and ask your question? And Robert, we've got only about a minute per speaker. So if you could keep it as brief as you can, whilst also answering comprehensively, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Robert, my question is, we read all the time that the root to all these problems in Lebanon is corruption, that governments have been corrupt forevermore there. Do you see any realistic chance that that corruption can be rooted out? And that some sort of more stable government could be established there?
Quickly, there's both corporate and sectional or sectoral corruption, in the sense that each of the communities wants to grab that biggest possible share of the national cake. And there's the individual corruption, with a certain lot of fat cats getting their money out into Switzerland and elsewhere. I think the idea of personal sanctions on some of these people is a good answer, and that this is what Macron is looking for. But the idea to be able to form a government, agree on a president, anything in Lebanon, and the whole time I've ever been going there, is very, very difficult. I wish I wasn't pessimistic, but the people are lovely, and they make me pessimistic.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. Derek, would you like to ask your question? I know that Kristof is really keen to answer it.
Thank you, Isabel. Yes, my question was, and Mirna in some way addressed, is clearly there are other external powers apart from France, which was a colonial power. So Syria, the role of Iran, the role of Israel, who of course invaded, the Gulf states who funded the reconstruction, the United States. I'd also throw in Turkey as, you know, the neo-Ottoman policy of Erdogan. So as in, I think most, if not all, Middle Eastern states, foreign powers have their interests to promote, and they don't do it selflessly. So I think we have to be careful about the role of foreign powers and expecting the outside world to solve Lebanon's problems.
Kristof?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think that, you know, outside powers have always played a big role in Lebanon, and Lebanon in that sense was never really independent because they were always dependent on some of the outside states. Most notably, maybe Iran, Syria, the Saudis, France and the US. What is interesting, what you see now, I think, is a shift, so to say, from the Saudi influence, because my impression and what I hear a lot, because we work with the Sunni community a lot, is that the Saudis have lost interest in Lebanon. They just, after sponsoring the reconstruction after the civil war, they are still, of course, engaged, and they have a lot to say here, but they are losing interest. And there's one state that is pushing in instead, and that is Turkey. And I think that is a fundamental shift that you are seeing. You're seeing a lot of activity, especially in the north and the strong Sunni communities in Tripoli, where the Turks are going in quite heavily. And yeah, this is, you know, in line with what the Turks are doing in the Mediterranean. And then another player came in, or is coming in, that, or might be coming in, is China. China is looking in for the reconstruction of the Beirut port. And I think that is also of concern for us Europeans. I don't think it's in our interest to have, you know, another port in the Mediterranean that is run by the Chinese. There are lots of other elements, the Iranians and Hezbollah and so on, but this will be too long now, so I just keep it with that. And I think this Turkish element is really new, and maybe the Chinese element, or the eventual Chinese element, is also new.
Thank you, Kristof. And I've had another question that the person doesn't want to speak out loud, and it's to Alistair. Alistair, what would you be pushing the UK government to be doing to support Lebanon?
Goodness, well, where do you start? Because I mean, actually, what Kristof just said there touches on what I said in my presentation about Lebanon being this venue for many of these proxy conflicts. And in fact, the growing influence of Turkey and of China, and the interest of Turkey and China, illustrates pretty well why you know, we can't afford to walk away from any of these theatres at the present. I think what I would want to be doing is, first of all, staying pretty close to France and Macron, who is doing as much, I think, as any European government can do in this. I would also, I think, be wanting to take a wider regional perspective. Dear God, if ever there was a time that we really needed to have a functioning GCC, this is it. And you know, again, Kristof touched there on the disengagement of Saudi. My own take on that is that actually there are only so many fronts on which any country can possibly fight. And as far as Saudi Arabia is concerned, they've got so many irons in the fire at the moment that they are, you know, that's what takes them to a point where they can't engage in Lebanon the way that they have done. So for those Gulf countries that we have good, strong working relationships with and who can be trusted partners, so I'm being here at Kuwait, Qatar, Oman, Jordan, you know, we should be wanting to edge them towards engagement in a positive way, which is by no means an easy task. You know, I think one of the things that we will have to be doing, if you think the World Bank reckons that there's something in the region of £8.1 billion of damage caused by the 4th of August, we have to stand alongside France and the other European nations ready with our checkbook.
Wow, thank you. Sorry to say that a lot of problems are solved by money, and it often boils down to that. Mirna, I just wanted to pass on to you. you come across as somebody who's very, very committed, fiercely loyal to your profession and to your country. In the midst of so many people feeling a very low morale within your profession, and as you say, leaving the country, what is it that has motivated you to stay and to fight so vociferously for the people that you work with and the people of your country? You've got the last voice for the last couple of minutes.
Thank you for this very important question. And what drives me to stay is my philosophy that the country is not a resort. You come to it when it's in good shape, and you leave it when it needs you. I know for sure that my country needs me now, needs me to stay, to help, at least in my area of expertise. So it's my belongingness, my feeling, being proud of being Lebanese, and my citizenship, my sense of citizenship. All these things are pushing me to stay and to fight for the well-being of the nurses, for the well-being of the society, for the well-being of the healthcare system in Lebanon. So any country is not a resort that we leave when it gets destructed and then we come back when it's in good shape. This is my philosophy. This is how I feel towards my country. And I'm very proud to be Lebanese, despite the fact that I'm not proud of our politicians, but I'm proud of the Lebanese population that in less than 20 hours, the healthcare system was able to take care of 5,000 injuries. Less than 20 hours, every person received care. So mind you that we are working with very scarce resources, but this shows you that we are a very resilient country. Nurses from all areas of Lebanon came to Beirut to help, and those who were not able to reach, they donated blood to help the people. So this is something very important that reflects on how the Lebanese people think. I think as people, we don't differentiate between different sects and religion, and we all want our country to flourish. But unfortunately, we have politicians who think very selfishly. And thank you.
Wow, that's really inspirational. And I know that everybody here has been so inspired by all of the speakers, so thank you very much. Benedikt, I just wanted to flag, although we did not have a question for you, I have had a comment that your analysis, your economic analysis was very succinct, very detailed, but also it conveyed the facts in a very simple way. I don't know how you managed to do all of that in one session, but thank you very much. So
Thank you.
I will pass on to James Brown, who is from the National Liberal Club, and all that remains for me to say is shukran to everybody who has attended and everybody who has spoken. It's been an absolute privilege for me to chair this event. James.
You're on mute, James.
Unmute, James.
Yeah, I've done that. Here we go. Okay. Yeah, we've been fortunate. Yeah, we've been fortunate twice now. We've been fortunate this evening to hear from a host of guest speakers whose wide-ranging experiences and perspectives have helped us understand more fully the political, social, and economic challenges currently facing the Lebanon. One factor that's consistently come across is that the Lebanese people continue to have a resilience and identity which I feel sure will see them through these difficult times. My sincere thanks on behalf of the National Liberal Club European Forum to Kristof, Benedikt, Alastair, Robert and Mirna for their outstanding contributions and for leaving us both informed and realistic about the situation in the country today. We thank you all, and also the chair for the evening, Isabel, very much for finding the time to be with us through the new norm for discussion, Zoom. So stay safe and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Alex.